Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. Ahead of the official Labor Day holiday, we are asking labor leaders about the state of the U.S. workforce. How are workers faring, and what are the challenges and the changes that have shaped the labor market? Well, joining me tonight to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly for American workers are Dr. Anthony Estreet, CEO of the National Association of Social Workers, Ray Robinson, President of Local 140 American Postal Workers Union, and Mark Federici, President of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, Local 400. Gentlemen, thank you so much for spending some time with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting
Thanks
us.
for having us.
Sure thing. Let me just throw a couple of things at you real quick. In July of 2024, the civilian labor force in the U.S. was just under 170 million. And 62% of the workers say they are content with their jobs, according to the U.S. Conference Board. But American workers list the top 5 things that cause them job dissatisfaction: being underpaid, having an unsupportive or untrustworthy boss, that's obviously a big one, limited career growth at their organization, meaning, of course, a lack of meaning behind the roles that they serve, and a lack of work-life balance. So let me start with you, Ray Robinson. Your thoughts about those top 5 things. Are you hearing those same kinds of concerns from the postal workers?
Yes, well, a lot of times they do surveys and they generally ask questions like, "Are you satisfied?" So when we go into negotiations, the problem is that most people are going to say, "Yeah, they're satisfied," but they are not satisfied with the salary. Most of the time with the unions, we're going to fight for the benefits, the health insurance, life insurance, which can sometimes be way more beneficial than just like an hour raise. They always complain about the bosses. That's one of the major concerns we have, and we've decided and tried to get strategies to deal with hostile working place or hostile managers or supervisors.
Mm-hmm.
The growth is kind of hard to have growth. They basically is based on the position that they have, what salary they're going to get, and always with the balance of life and work, because a lot of them work overtime. You have to really set aside time to spend with your family, and that we always have that problem for our employees.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Estreet, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, and so I it's interesting. We get into this space of using the term work-life balance, and I think
Mm-hmm.
for me, I often try to characterize it as life balance because we spend a large majority of our time at work, which is a huge chunk of our life, right? And so it's really life balance. And how do we get into that space of having time for our family, but also finding that job satisfaction? I do think that it's interesting that one of the things that people talked about was job growth or opportunities within the job and what that looks like. It's been a huge conversation within the social work profession, really, in terms of both higher pay for social workers, but also what does career advancement look like in various aspects of social work, right? And so sometimes that climb up the corporate ladder is a higher leadership position, but also I like to have people think about what do lateral movements look like, right? If you are in one area, so social work has the ability to be in a lot of different spaces. So if you're a social worker
Mm-hmm.
that is in healthcare, what would it look like to be a social worker in the school system or a mental health therapist, right? So creating different opportunities for you to experience different parts of your job is one of the things that we often talk about. But this idea of life balance, it does create a huge place in this conversation, because also while we're thinking about working overtime, right? While I love the idea of people getting more hours and working overtime, I oftentimes pause to think about what does that look like? Is that because there's a workforce shortage in that area? And how do we ensure that there is a balance between the organization and the actual number of hours that they need for their workers to have? Equally, you know, oftentimes, especially in the social work space, people talk about, oh, work-life balance, you know, and to avoid burnout, or this idea of burnout in the industry, go on vacation. Uh, I've gone on vacation as a social worker doing therapy, and I've come back usually needing a vacation from the vacation because I had to answer a whole lot of emails that were sitting in my inbox, right? And so I want us to be able to also have that conversation about, you know, we think about a life balance, also thinking about how do we impact or change the amount of burnout that we're seeing in the workforce. And the solution to burnout is not a vacation, it's actually changing the systems that cause that burnout.
Mr. Federici, your thoughts about it?
Look, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation to come
Oh,
on
sure, absolutely.
today, and I'm very, very flattered to be here and very encouraged to participate. Look, folks are never paid enough. I mean, our membership is comprised of folks that work in retail grocery and meat packing and chicken processing facilities, and some large number of people in healthcare. But the main thrust of our membership is retail grocery, and that's a pretty unique environment to work in. It's the predominant workforce is part time. It can be a younger workforce. The turnover is extreme, and so it's there's a diversity that makes up the workforce, and then therefore there's a diversity in what any common interest then there is. Certainly, underpayment is a big deal. Certainly, if you have a bad store manager or unsupportive management team that doesn't work as a team and is more authoritarian, if you will, that creates a different tone within a retail space. We're in the business of customer service. If we don't think that we're getting a fair shake, then we're going to be unhappy employees or union members, and then it's not a good customer experience when somebody comes in, if they're dealing with somebody that's working there that feels like they're not getting treated fairly. There's downstream consequences to all that. The only thing, work-life balance. Obviously everybody's striving for work-life balance. For a working person to get work-life balance, I think that's a wonderful concept, and I think it's a wonderful thing to strive for. But in our workforce, where it's predominantly part-time, and you're struggling for hours, and you're struggling for regular hours, and you're struggling for a certain level. Our pay is based on our hours. Our health insurance is based on hours. So there's a real anxiety level when it comes to getting hours, having those hours be reliable, and then having those hours be the same time of the week or the same time of the day, so you can kind of structure your life, if you know what I'm referring to. The other thing I'd throw in there, certainly from our perspective, and it's everywhere, is a safe workplace. Our folks are in the public all the time, and it seems to be a thing now to have gun violence in grocery stores. Certainly, we all read about schools, and we read about different unfortunate and tragic incidents that happen all too often in our beloved country. Grocery stores are right there now too. So there's a level of anxiety, and there's a level of vulnerability that our members face on a daily basis in regards to their own personal safety, in the different societal problems of shoplifting and things like that. Our folks are on the front line with that on a daily basis, and I can tell you, when you get somebody talking about it, you can cut it with a knife. There's an old saying in the labor movement about, we just come to work here, we didn't come to die, and too many people, even as we speak today, are under that pressure of that kind of anxiety, and all they did want to do is go to work today. And
I wanted to ask Mr. Robinson about something that you actually are talking about, Mr. Federici, and obviously this is a very, very real thing. and I think in some senses, I'm telling my age, but when you talked about postal workers or the postman or however the original term was, what was it?
Oh,
Mr. Robinson, rain, sleet, snow, dark of night, whatever. And these were highly coveted jobs. They were also jobs that were well respected. But in some senses, the world has changed, and the outside world has changed. But that outside world has impacted the world in which all of you work. But specifically, Mr. Robinson, talk to me about some of those kinds of concerns about how the outside world has kind of crept in to postal service work.
well, we don't have as much mail as we used to. And part of the problem is that with the Postmaster General, the frontline supervisors and managers are always on the employees that get the mail out, riding them. But because of some of the changes that the Postmaster General has made, uh, when it used to take 1 to 3 days to get your mail, now it may take a week, 2 weeks, and it doesn't have anything to do with the workers on the floor. However, they catch it from the customers constantly coming to the window, asking them where's their mail. I should have got the mail, and a lot of times they may show that they have delivered stuff that wasn't delivered at the time. So we are dealing with the fact that because of on the top, they took away the standards is affecting the postal employees because they're under stress because the customers are jumping on them for stuff that's not their fault. So we constantly have, even at the higher level, have talked to the Postmaster General about trying to get back those standards to 1, 2, 3 day delivery. And because of working in warehouses and stuff, they've always been under a lot of stress and pressure. Sometimes they've gotten robbed, like the guy from the store said. And when that happens, people may be out for a long time. And when they do come back to work, they're never the same. Because when you have a gun put to your head, that's kind of scary.
Yeah. I think the other issue, and if you can at least start, Dr. S. Street, and we'll continue on the other side. A lot of people don't often think about the safety of social workers as well, because sometimes you're just dealing with people who have a little problem that can be immediately addressed if you're working for a municipality.
Mm-hmm.
Other times you're working with someone who may need more than a social worker, but the social workers are the first to figure that out.
Yeah, and so you bring up a very good point just around social work safety in and of itself, right? And that's a huge issue that NASW continues to advocate for. Social workers are in a variety of different spots, from case management all the way to IT and artificial intelligence. However, oftentimes we're dealing with consumers, and sometimes those consumers, we are introduced to them on some of their most trying times, right? Whether it be a crisis, whether it be a mental health challenge, and to your point, we sometimes we enter that situation not really knowing how it goes. I mean, if you do a quick Google search of social workers that have been harmed, you will find a significant amount of stories where social workers have lost their lives or been harmed because of the work that we're doing, or because of the type of work that we're doing, right? And make no mistake about it, like when social workers are in that child welfare state, typically the goal is family reunification. But on those few instances where we have to remove a child, it is a very trying event that is traumatic for the family, the child, but also for the social worker.
So hold that point, if I may, because I do need to take a really quick break. We want to remind our listeners that you can hear this in every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on our website, WHUR.com. The original Quiet Storm is next on WHUR. I'm Harold Fisher. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation about the state of the U.S. labor force and those who work in it. My guests are Ray Robinson, president of Local 140, the American Postal Workers Union, Mark Federici, president of the United Food and Commercial Workers, Local number 400, and Dr. Anthony Estreet, CEO of the National Association of Social Workers. Before the break, Dr. Estreet, you were talking about social work safety. Please continue your point.
Yeah, and so the point that I was making is when social workers enter into a situation, we're always evaluating and assessing the situation, trying to figure out like what needs to happen first, what needs to happen second, and all that. But in some situations, right, because we are entering the space when people are in crisis or they may not be at their best, it's oftentimes difficult to evaluate the safety of that time. Now, when people become dangerous to themselves or others, certainly we have protocols for that. But in situations like I was explaining, where a social worker has to remove a child from a household as a last resort, sometimes those family members may lash out. Sometimes there are times where police involvement have to happen, or oftentimes the social worker is going into that space without any police escort and having to make real-time decisions about their safety versus doing their job. And I think that's a conversation that we really need to have more conversations about, is really how do we protect our healthcare workers as they're performing their jobs in a time where we are also talking about the importance of mental health, the importance of healthcare across the United States.
Now that we have a good understanding of the individual issues that each of you are addressing, let's zoom out a little bit, and I'll start with you, Mr. Federici. Are there any broader trends in labor that are helping or hurting your workers, things that you're seeing not just affecting the food and commercial workers, but others, and you're just saying, oh, wait a minute, or this is a good thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would point out this. Unions are more popular today than they've been at any point since as far back as 1967.
Why do you think that is?
I think there's a couple factors with that. And it's just my personal view. My personal view is, COVID-19, the experience of COVID-19 has changed everybody's perspective, and has changed everybody's sense of worth, and has changed what people are willing to put up with, and what compensation they think they deserve for what they do for a living. Mm-hmm. And I really believe there's people are very much leaning into their worth and their worth to an organization, and they are coming at their life and their work life from a perspective of they see everybody moving past them. They see corporations making record profits. And they have lived for generations now with being stuck in a certain zone, if you will, certain economic zone. And there's a sense of that being incorrect. And so they're in a search for how do we move ourselves forward. And they have come through COVID and have come through being felt threatened by COVID. And there's an enhanced sense of worth within their work, and I believe that is carrying on. And we get inquiries from all kinds of people wanting a union now. Everybody wants a union, and there's all kinds of different folks that are trying to organize a union. And the point I'd make in regards to the second part of your question, Harold, is the negative part of that is, we need a labor relations structure of laws in the United States to be modernized to accommodate, the modern workforce. The laws as to which we work under, all of us, in regards to organized labor, whether it's public or private sector, they're born from the Great Depression. They're born from the 1930s, a lot of things have changed in the world since
Yeah.
Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s, and God bless it, our labor laws need to change to keep up with that desire, and that's what I would point out.
Mr. Robinson, we already know the impact of email on the postal service. Arguably, that probably has to be the big watershed moment for the U.S. Postal Service. It's easier to type something, send it in your computer, than to take a pen, write it down, put a stamp on it. Okay, but with that said, from your perspective, how do you believe that automation and AI, for example, is impacting jobs and job security in your industry?
Well, it's hurt us badly, but they've learned and been negotiating with management to get other things like fingerprinting and some kind of banking um, because of the predatory loans and stuff like that. So they're working outside of the box to try and find other ways that they can have revenue. And the Postal Service is entertaining some of the ideas that they do have from the national level. But it definitely has killed us. Um, Even though, like I said previously, the Postmaster General has created some of these problems, but it's real that we don't have the mail we used to have. They're trying to do more parcels. Um, they do stuff like with the election mail and stuff like that. They actually put together different sites to deal with the mail, and especially during Christmas or during this election time, they concentrate on making sure the mail gets out timely when it's the election mail. So they do have other ideas, and hopefully they'll work with that. They are constantly on Congress and on the Hill to try and create ideas to save the post office, because it is the people's post office.
Yeah. Dr. Estreet, just like many other jobs, there are just certain things that automation and technology cannot do. And I think this is particularly the case for social workers who, psychological social workers and all of the various layers of social workers that you know better than I. But certainly we are seeing modern technology encroach. Your thoughts about those kind of trends and impacting the social worker labor market?
Yeah, and so I think it's a great question. It's also an interesting question, right? So when we think more about technology and artificial intelligence, we are seeing it come into the social work space. We're seeing it in terms of how it can be an a benefit in terms of helping people with writing clinical progress notes and things like that. But we're also seeing some organizations or some corporations come through and try to use AI to deliver mental health services, right? And so that's a huge question and challenge for social workers and the mental health industry as a whole. Is it ethical to have people thinking that they're talking to a therapist when it could be artificial intelligence? How do you disclose that, and what will people choose? Is it, certainly taking social workers out of the space by trying to create a situation where they're getting help at a lower market from artificial intelligence, a lower market rate from artificial intelligence, and two, really, what does that look like overall? And so certainly social work is definitely in the space to talk about that. As I said earlier, social workers are both in the mental health space, but also in that technology and artificial intelligence space. So we're helping to create some of the rules around what are some of the safeguards around artificial intelligence? How do we ensure public safety, and what happens to the data once people enter it into artificial intelligence? So I think there's a lot of unknowns in the whole workforce around artificial intelligence and how we use technology. Now, make no mistake about it, I think the one thing that I would be remiss to not talk about is also the benefit of technology, right? Because we talked about COVID a little bit earlier, but COVID also expanded the reach of mental health, right? Through the use of telehealth and teletherapy, people that were not able to access care because they may have been in a rural area or in difficult parts were not able to do it. But also during a pandemic, when folks were told to stay at home and shut down, we were still able to access them and provide them with those mental health services and check on them. Like I tell people all the time, the root word of social work is social, right? So being able to interact with people, being able to connect with people gave us a sense of connection to society at a time when we were basically told to isolate and stay at home. I think it also highlighted the need for more mental health and a focus on wellness around the workforce. As we talked about earlier, you see more people now talking about workforce and workforce issues, well-being, unionization. How do we fight for more things as a worker? And that is not absent the social work workforce. You look up the average social work salary right now, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is $58,000. Now, I want you to understand, to be a licensed social worker, you have to get your bachelor's degree, then a master's degree, then pass an examination. The amount of student loan debt that we have to encounter to get to this place to be able to impact the mental health workforce is not reflective in the salary that is being reflected by the federal government. And in fact, social workers have not received a raise from the federal government in terms of their reimbursement rate since 1989. And so these are issues that we need to talk about because, again, as my colleagues have said on this call, the rate of labor laws and how we look at labor have not changed over time to keep up where we are today.
Let me ask you, Mr. Federici, about some recent headlines. One that specifically impacts your union, and that is the Albertson-Kroger merger. Is that the possibility of that happening? Is that labor friendly or not? Are you concerned about it?
Yes, I'm very concerned about it. We're opposed. Local 400 is opposed to the merger. We represent workers that work at both Kroger and Albertsons. Locally, Albertsons is Safeway. Mm-hmm. We represent about 9,000 Kroger employees throughout Virginia, West Virginia, Tennessee, Ohio, and Kentucky, and the nature of things as a result of a successful merger will lead to a consolidation of the grocery industry, a further consolidation of the grocery industry, which in English means a monopoly. And what we're able to do by having represented companies that are in competition with each other to use the power of the marketplace, then to further enhance our ability to negotiate successful labor agreements. And if at the end of the day there is a monopolized retail grocery industry, then that takes away from that ability to literally play one company off of the other to enhance the quality of our collective bargaining agreements. And what does that mean in English? It means people will make less money because there'll be less competition. The other concern that's there is for consumers. You know, there's a reason why there's a Federal Trade Commission in the United States. There's a reason why we have antitrust regulations and laws in the United States, because the view of a monopolized industry, whether it be retail grocery in this case or any other industry, is that stifles competition, that enables one organization to dominate a market. And we're in a free market society, and with one dominant party in a market, then they can control prices, they can control wages, hours, and working conditions, and it will have a depressing effect on not only consumer prices, but we believe on the compensation that employees receive from the company. That's why we're opposed.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Robinson, about this article in the Washington Post earlier this week about flight attendants who say they're barely surviving, they're facing homelessness, hunger, and are probably making less than $25,000 a year. You are old enough to remember the prestige, just like postal workers. Flight attendant, back in the day, that was a very prestigious job, well respected, and well paid. But moreover, the issue of a living wage and being able to make enough money to not to be rich, but to be able to house yourself, to feed your family, and to that end to be able to sleep at night. Talk to me about the evolution of these kinds of challenges.
That is a real tragedy. Um, the places that's going on, I know probably not unionized. I know some flight attendants that have unions. They've been on marches with us as well. Um, that's something that we constantly fight for. Matter of fact, right now we're in contract negotiations. That's the major thing. A living wage, benefits. That's what we constantly fight for, and that's the reason why it's important to have unions. Um, it may not be the same as it used to be in the day, but it seems like the unions are coming back. People are starting to understand the importance of unions to get a fair living wage. We've been on the front line with the restaurant workers like McDonald's and stuff like that. So we believe that everybody should have a living wage, and that, like I said, that's just a tragedy about the flight attendants. Like currently, we're in negotiations ourselves right now. That's one of the major things we fight for, to make sure people are able to have a living wage and also have the health benefits and life insurance, stuff like that.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Street, particularly in your line of work with your constituency. Let's talk a little bit about diversity and inclusion, depending on uh, which news channel you work for. That's a dirty phrase, or listen to, I should say. But with that said, not just as it relates to diversity and inclusion for race of the workers, but also for being culturally competent, as well as generationally competent. Older workers, how is that being, all of those, but particularly, but again, older workers, how is that being addressed for your constituency?
Yeah, so I think like you said, depending on the station that you listen to or the social media platform that you're on, this idea of diversity, equity, inclusion can be either a bad thing or a great thing, right? And oftentimes the conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion is relegated to race. But when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, we're talking about a lot of different factors. We're talking about race, we're talking about gender, sexuality, sexual orientation, presentation, age, all those different things. And I think one of the most beautiful things that I believe that we have right now is we have 5 generations in the workforce. Now, make no mistake about it, it makes for very difficult conversations because there's the old adage of this is how we've always done things versus the younger folks that are coming to the workforce are like, oh, we need to do different things to be innovative and use more technology. But I think there is the ability to pass the baton, right? And so when you think about learning how to do your job, I remember when I was putting myself through undergrad and I was a mechanic, right? And so there's the way of learning it from the book, but then also having that mechanic that has been there for 25 years to show me all the shortcuts and to show me all the ways to do the work better, to do it faster and much more efficient. That's something that you just can't teach. And so having diversity in the workplace should not be seen as a bad thing. It should actually be rewarded and embraced because it teaches us new ways to think about the work. It teaches us new ways to engage in the work, but it teaches us about each other. We're on a call right now talking about various different sectors of the workplace, but in the same sense, I'm learning more about what's happening in the grocery business than probably I've had in quite some time. What's happening in the postal industry, right? Because we're having these conversations, and again, we are all on this call, and by presentation, we represent a lot of different demographics from diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that we're having a very robust conversation about our experiences in the workplace. So when people say that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a bad thing, I just I don't believe that. I believe that, and this is true in the social work workforce. Social workers are out here starting as young as undergrad because they got their BSW, and they're in a space where they are retiring early or doing some part-time work as a therapist because they still love to connect with people. I think that it embraces the diversity and the differences that we show up in our United States.
Mr. Federici, same question for you. Considering the current political climate, how does your union navigate that issue of diversity and inclusion?
You practice it. You practice inclusion and you practice diversity, and it ought to be, in my view, it needs to be embraced. I mean, we're in a political season now, and there's a lot of pretty words that are thrown around by politicians. Other politicians, the words aren't so pretty, but a great way of looking at a workforce or a workplace in our environment is the mosaic of the country, and a mosaic is made beautiful by its diversity. And I believe that applies to the United States, and it ought to be applied to the United States. And then, as representatives of working people, then the best thing that we need to do as representatives is to listen and know that we don't have all the answers in ourselves, and that if you are able to listen and incorporate people's hopes, dreams, and desires into your work, then we're doing our job as effective representatives. And that's how I'd answer that.
Here's the other thing that is now part of the modern workforce. And I'll start with you, Mr. Robinson. The gig economy, the side hustle, all of that has impacted the 9-to-5, the insured workers with 401ks, pension, what have you. What impact do you believe it has had on modern labor, where some people will say, if you don't do it, somebody else will, without labor or union representation?
Right. It creates a great problem because when we are in negotiations, they'll say that they can do the same thing you can do for less. So it's very important for us to show the reason why, like the gentleman said earlier, the experience that somebody has on the job, 20, 30 years, you can't just get that from getting somebody on the street. Many years ago, when they had the postal strike, they tried to get the military to come in there and do the mail, and they couldn't do it. So it's very important with the experience people have, and we have to use that to our advantage when we're negotiating, to tell them that while it may seem like they can do the same thing, they really can't.
Your thoughts about that, Dr. Estrie, the gig economy?
It's interesting. This idea of we can get people to come in and do it at a lower cost, and from the standpoint of social work, it has resulted in challenges, right? And so one of the things that we are consistently advocating for is title protection, right? In no other industry, especially in healthcare, can you call yourself a anesthesiologist and not have the education or skill set to be able to do that? But social work, a lot of counties and different organizations have allowed people to call themselves social workers, even though they're not skilled as social workers or trained as social workers. But whenever something bad happens, what do you hear? Oh, a social worker did this. And you look in that person's background, they've not been trained by a social worker. They should not be using that title. So what has happened is that a lot of our industries have started using people that may have degrees in different things, but not trained as a social worker to do a social worker's job for a lower amount of pay, which is also impacted. Again, when you think of the average salary of a social worker, it brings it down because they are able to find labor at a cheaper rate. Equally, I think that, a lot of people use the gig economy as an offset for their main job. I've certainly had my share of Uber rides where people, I am naturally a social person, so I talk to everybody, where they're doing it as a side hustle or a gig. But then, and this is just my personal opinion, I think there are some differences and different things that people like. And so my wife had an instance where she was using a Uber, and she had, you know, a suitcase that was heavier than normal, right? And so the Uber driver didn't get out and put it in. But if it would have been a taxi driver that, you know, does the work, they would have got out. And it's just customer service that, you know, sometimes we lose that bit of customer service that connects us back to the work through gig economy. But I do think that, you know, I think gig economy is here to stay, and we need to figure out like the best ways to work it within our society so that it's advantageous for everybody.
Real quick, I'll give you guys 30 seconds each. I'll start with Mr. Federici. The future of labor, do you think it's bright, or do you think there are going to be severe challenges, and why? Real quick.
That's a great question. I do think it's bright. I do think the future for labor is bright because the need is there and the issues never go away. You know, having stable communities requires people to have stable employment. Stable employment puts a roof over our head, allows people to pay their mortgages, pay their bills, put their kids through school, raise a family, do all those things. The challenge is always there. And the challenge is, you know, from the corporate America, you know, it's what can I say? To be honest, it's a system of greed. And as long as that system is in place in regards to corporate greed, then there'll be a need for folks like us to call into question what do, you know, are people being able to make a living wage, have health insurance, and a retirement at the end of your work life.
Mr. Robinson, real quick, challenges, or do you believe the future is bright for labor, and why?
I absolutely believe the future is bright. We have many challenges with the post office. They're currently trying to eliminate jobs when people retire, move people from one place to another, consolidate some of the plants. But if we all stick together and work together and understand that it's beneficial for the future people that's coming to work to have a union so that they also have benefits, a decent retirement, and understand now when things pop up, we have to join together and understand that we're all in this together. So I believe the future is bright. We have some challenges, but we're going to be okay.
I'll let you have the last 30 seconds, Dr. Estreet.
I believe the future is bright as well. I mean, social work is one of the fastest growing professions out there, right? And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to embrace the workforce, to really think about some of these challenges, especially as they relate to pay, but also to make sure that we're prioritizing people's health and mental health, right? Because if we don't have a healthy workforce, how are we going to continue that? And so as we go into Labor Day, I really just hope that everybody has a great weekend and really think about how to take care of themselves and prioritize their health and actually take some time to rest.
Yes, indeed. Well said. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for participating in this really important conversation. Labor Day weekend notwithstanding, it doesn't just stop here, but I really appreciate your time. That is the Daily Drum for this Thursday, August 29th. I'm Harold Fisher.